They reopened the hospital, but they never cleansed what remained inside.
The air was thick with the scent of mildew and long-forgotten antiseptic, the kind that clung to your throat like old secrets. Dr. Lena Morell stepped out of her dusty Toyota and stared up at the crumbling facade of St. Hedwig Memorial Hospital. It had been decommissioned for nearly 2 decades, and it looked the part. Windows shattered like teeth knocked loose, ivy crawling over the brick like veins, and the sign hanging by a single rusted chain. She pulled her coat tighter around her frame, not for the chill, but for the way the place felt. Even from the parking lot, it breathed a sort of low-grade dread. Lena wasn't there by chance. A grant from the State Historical Society had approved her research proposal to study abandoned medical facilities and their psychological impact on communities. She had chosen St. Hedwig not just for its infamy. The place was whispered about in urban legends, blamed for everything from ghost sightings to missing persons, but because her mother had once worked here, a psychiatric nurse, one of the last to leave before the place shut down in 2007. She hadn't told the grant committee that. She hadn't told anyone, not even her husband. The old security gate groaned as she pushed it open, the sound echoing across the empty lot. Her boots crunched over glass and gravel. The place had a kind of presence, as if it resented being approached. Her camera swung from her neck, bumping gently against her chest with each step. She paused at the doors. Locked, of course, but the side access, formerly for staff, had been forced open long ago. The plywood covering it had been peeled back by trespassers, and a narrow entry gaped like an invitation. She hesitated for only a second before ducking through. Inside, the air was worse. Damp, metallic, sour. She clicked on her flashlight and swept it over the peeling walls and mold-spotted tiles. Graffiti streaked across everything. Some obscene, some desperate, and some that made no sense at all. Symbols she didn't recognize, carved deep into the plaster. The beam of her flashlight caught movement to her left, but when she swung around, it was only a length of torn curtain fluttering in a breeze from a broken window. She took a deep breath. "All right?" she whispered to herself. "Just document. Take notes. Photograph. No dramatics." The first hour was easy enough. She explored the ER, the surgical prep area, and a small administrative wing. Everything was destroyed. Equipment rusted, papers scattered, wheelchairs overturned like the occupants had been ripped away mid-escape. There were signs of squatters. Sleeping bags, burned-out candles, wrappers, even a moldy box of powdered donuts. Then she found the psych wing. It wasn't marked anymore, the signage rusted beyond legibility, but she recognized it from her research. Tucked into the northernmost corner of the building, it had always been controversial. Underfunded, rumored to have housed more than just mental illness. Some whispered about experiments, others about a particularly violent incident in the early 2000s that had led to a patient uprising. No one could quite confirm the details. The hallway narrowed, choked by collapsed ceiling panels and black mold. Lena pulled her scarf up over her mouth and pushed forward. She wasn't here to be afraid. She was here to see. The first room on her right was a padded cell. The padding had been torn down in some places, revealing dark, claw-like gouges in the walls beneath. Her flashlight flickered. She tapped it, annoyed, and moved on. The next room was a common area. Tables overturned, board games scattered, one of them stuck in the middle of a half-played game of Monopoly. The pieces had dust on them, yes, but the board looked fresh. No graffiti, no water damage. She bent closer. The thimble was just at the edge of free parking. She heard a cough. Spinning. She aimed the flashlight behind her. Nothing. But it hadn't been an echo. It was the kind of sound lungs made when they were tired of being alive. Wet and worn. She waited, her own breath frozen, but heard only the creak of the building around her. "You're letting your mind wander," she said out loud. Her voice sounded too loud, too alone. She documented the room quickly, snapping photos, noting the oddly preserved game board. The hallway split ahead, left toward more patient rooms, right toward what should be the nurse's station. She chose the right, heart pounding harder than she wanted to admit. The nurse's station looked like it had been evacuated in a hurry. Clipboards still hung from hooks on the wall. A coffee mug with lipstick on the rim sat next to a crusted-over thermos. The phone's receiver dangled by its cord. Her flashlight beam caught something on the floor behind the counter. A wheelchair. Occupying it was a mannequin. Or, at least, she told herself it was a mannequin. It sat stiffly, plastic skin gleaming slightly under the dust. Its mouth was partially open, and one eye was missing. The other stared blankly forward. It wore an old patient gown, the kind with faded blue flowers. A name tag was clipped to the front. Lena stepped closer. Margaret Kay. She stepped back. Margaret. Her mother's name. A crack sounded in the hallway. Sharp, like something splitting open. Just settling, she murmured. But her feet were already backing away. The camera bumped against her again. The hallway behind her was dim, but she felt movement there. Felt it more than saw it. A rush of shadow, too fast to make out, and then gone. She should leave. Come back in the morning. But the idea of turning her back on that hallway, another sound. This time, a shuffle. Closer. She swung her light back toward the mannequin. It was gone. The wheelchair was empty. A smear of something wet trailed from its seat across the floor and disappeared into the darkness. Lena's heart thundered. She pressed her back to the counter, trying to steady her breath. This was impossible. The phone rang. Not from her pocket. Not a cell. The old landline on the counter. It rang again. She stared at it. Dust drifted in the beam of her flashlight. The receiver twisted gently on its cord like it was breathing. The third ring. She reached for it. Static. Then a voice. Whispering. Not in English. Something else. Her ears strained. Sounded familiar but wrong. Like lullabies played backwards. Then it said her name. Lena. Her own name. Drawn out. Wet. She dropped the receiver. It bounced off the counter and clattered to the floor. She was already backing away, fumbling for the hallway, for the exit. The air was colder now, thick with something fetid. Then, from behind her, the sound of the Monopoly board being turned over. She didn't look back. She ran. Her feet pounded down the hallway, slipping over broken tiles and crumbling drywall. The beam of her flashlight jittered wildly across the walls, catching glimpses of old flyers, torn portraits, stains that had never been cleaned. Her breath came ragged, echoing ahead of her and bouncing back like someone, or something, was breathing just behind her shoulder. She reached the corridor junction she'd passed earlier. The left hallway was even darker now, the air heavier. She turned back toward the ER, toward the exit. But the moment she rounded the corner, she stopped cold. The door she'd come through was no longer there. Where the open staff entrance had been, now there was only a solid wall of cracked brick and flaking paint, like it had never existed. No, 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 she whispered, turning in frantic circles, the flashlight trembling in her grip. She retraced her steps, 5, 10 paces, and pressed her hands to the wall where the exit should have been. It was real, cold, solid, impossible. She backed away slowly, bumping into a rusted gurney that squealed as it shifted. The sound sliced through the silence like a scream. She whirled around, heart threatening to break through her chest. Then the whispering started again. Faint. From the hall she had just run from. She should have run again. But she didn't. Something in her brain shifted, like a needle skipping on a record. The terror hadn't left, but a strange numbness was beginning to wrap around it. She steadied her breath, lifted her flashlight, and walked back toward the psych ward. The whispering didn't grow louder, but it didn't fade either. It just kept going, layered and looping, like several voices speaking at once from inside a locked room. She passed the overturned Monopoly board. All the pieces were gone now. Just the board, sitting face down, soaking up something dark from the floor. The wheelchair was back at the nurse's station. This time it faced the hallway, and Margaret Kay was seated in it again. Her plastic face was the same, but her head was turned slightly now, as if watching Lena approach. Lena stopped, A part of her, the rational part, the scientist, the mother, the wife, was screaming to run, to smash a window and climb out and drive until she forgot the way back. But the other part, the part that had always wondered what her mother had meant in those final, confused days before her death, kept her rooted to the ground. "Margaret," Lena said. Her voice was hoarse. "Why are you here?" The mannequin didn't move. Lena stepped forward. "You worked here," she continued, her voice quaking. "You stayed longer than anyone else. You said something happened. You said—" Her throat caught. She remembered the last time she'd seen her mother alive. The old woman had grabbed her wrist with surprising strength and hissed, "They don't sleep. They only pretend." At the time, Lena had thought it was dementia, psychosis, years of stress and unresolved trauma. But now, in this place where walls changed and mannequins moved and phones rang with voices that shouldn't exist, those words returned with teeth. The mannequin's head twitched. Just a fraction. Enough to confirm it wasn't just a trick of the light. Lena backed away. "Okay," she whispered. "I'm going. I get it. I shouldn't have come back." She turned. Something was blocking the hallway. It stood just beyond her flashlight beam. Tall, angular, motionless. She froze. The light flickered. The shape didn't. Then it stepped forward. One leg first, bent wrong at the knee. Then the next. Its arms hung at its sides like they didn't belong to it. Its head lolled to one side, covered in gauze like an accident victim. But beneath the bandages, Lena caught the glint of eyes. Too many, too dark. It opened its mouth. No sound came out, but her ears rang like she'd been standing next to a jet engine. The mannequin behind her moved. She didn't look. She couldn't. The shape kept coming. Lena lunged sideways through a half-collapsed doorway and stumbled into what had once been a therapy room. Paintings still hung on the walls, childlike and feverish. One of them showed a woman in a hospital gown with dozens of mouths instead of a face. Another showed a spiral staircase descending into darkness, lined with faces pressed into the walls. She shut the door and pressed her back against it, panting. Then she noticed the writing, scrawled in every available inch of wall space, in charcoal, blood, and something that looked like bile. Over and over. They never left. She turned toward the nearest mirror. It was cracked, hanging at an angle. Something was wrong with her reflection. It didn't move. It just stood there. She reached out, smiled. She stumbled away, knocking over a chair. The reflection remained standing, head tilted, eyes wide. Its hand rose slowly, then tapped on the glass from the inside. Lena turned and ran again. She barreled through the door and into the hallway, and found herself in the lobby. Not the psych wing. The lobby. The same one she'd entered 3 hours ago. But the windows were now lined with black plastic. The double doors were bricked over from the inside. The chairs were overturned. And in the center of the floor was her mother's old ID badge. She hadn't seen it in years, had thought it lost in a fire. It sat there like a trap, like bait. She approached it slowly, knelt, picked it up. Margaret and Morel, RN Psychiatric Care. Night shift. The back of the badge was smeared in red. She flipped it over. A message was scrawled beneath the laminate. Find the red room. Then the room changed again. The air shifted, became heavier. A low rumble vibrated the floor beneath her. From every hallway, the whispering began again. Only now it sounded angry. She ran toward the eastern corridor, one she hadn't explored yet. A long hallway of shattered windows, light flickering in strange rhythms. Ahead, a set of steel doors were slightly ajar. She squeezed through them and found herself in what looked like a records room. Rows and rows of file cabinets, toppled shelves, and paper covering every inch of the floor like snow. She scanned the room. There, at the back, was a panel slightly loose in the wall. She wedged her fingers into it and pulled. Behind it was a staircase, narrow, steep, and the walls were painted red. The stairs groaned under her weight, each step complaining like an old man with secrets. Lena descended slowly, one hand skimming the wall for balance, the other clenched around her flashlight. The red paint absorbed the light instead of reflecting it. It wasn't the bright, sterile red of warning signs or emergency doors. This red was darker, murky, matte, the shade of dried blood and old rust. The further she went, the more the temperature dropped. With every step, a kind of pressure built behind her eyes, like descending into a deep-sea trench. The air was thick and moist, but oddly still. Not a whisper of wind or vibration of machinery. Just silence and her own breath, uneven and shallow. At the bottom, the stairs ended in a narrow hallway. No signs, no exit lights. Just more red walls and an old wooden door with a brass knob turned nearly green with age. There were scratch marks on the door, not just from fingernails or tools, but deep gouges, spaced evenly like someone or something had clawed at it in ritual. She reached out slowly, almost expecting it to swing open on its own. Didn't. The doorknob was ice-cold under her palm. She turned it. The door creaked open into a massive, windowless chamber. And suddenly, Lena understood why it had never shown up on blueprints. It hadn't been part of the hospital. Not originally. The walls here weren't red-painted brick or plaster. They were stone, ancient-looking, uneven, and wet. A dampness hung in the air that reeked of minerals and rot. The room was circular, the ceiling arching high above with old iron beams crisscrossing like the ribs of some buried beast. At the center of the floor, a symbol had been carved into the stone. No paint, no chalk, carved, freshly. The symbol was unfamiliar, circular, with concentric rings broken by jagged, spidery lines that looked almost like veins. It pulsed faintly as if lit from beneath. Around it were chairs, 12 of them, all facing inward. Each chair was occupied. She stepped forward, trembling. The first body was desiccated, shrunken in its clothes like a mummy, the jaw hanging loose. A hospital ID still clung to its collar. Dr. Samuel Irwin, Neurology II, was more decomposed. Bones poking through skin, hair clinging to a yellowed scalp. The third was missing its eyes. They all wore hospital IDs. Nurses, orderlies, therapists, doctors. All seated like they were attending a council meeting of the damned. She turned to flee, but the door was no longer there. Just more wall. Just more red. The air tightened. Something shifted in the chamber, subtle like a presence exhaling. And then, in the silence, a new sound joined her. Breathing. Not hers. She spun back around. The circle was no longer empty. In the center stood a figure. Not tall. Not short. Its body was shrouded in hospital linens. Clean, pristine, glowing white in contrast to the decay around it. No face was visible. Just the suggestion of a head under the sheets. It turned toward her without moving. A second figure joined it. Then a third. Then more. They rose from the chairs. Moved without motion. Drifted. Lena backed against the wall, breath frozen in her lungs. The flashlight flickered. Died. The chamber went dark. Only the pulse from the carved symbol remained, casting strange shadows up the walls. Her body was locked in place, not from fear but from something else. Something external. Like her limbs had been unknotted and forgotten. Then a voice. Feminine. Familiar. Why did you come back? Lena turned toward the sound. A woman stood by one of the chairs. She wasn't like the others. No linens. No decayed face. Just, Mom. Margaret Morell looked as she had 10 years before her death. Healthy, upright, clear-eyed. Her old nurse's uniform crisp. Her smile was faint, tired. You weren't supposed to see this place, Margaret said. Lena's throat caught. What is this? Her mother looked around the chamber. We called it the Red Room, but it was never ours. She paused. Her voice cracked. We just fed it. A scream rose in Lena's throat but never left her lips. Margaret stepped closer. We tried to stop. When we realized what was happening, we tried to lock it down. Seal the stairs. Bury the truth in paperwork and silence. What truth? Margaret raised her hand, pointed to the walls. Lena looked. Names, carved into the stone. Hundreds, some crossed out, some burned into the stone itself. All familiar. Patients, staff, even townspeople. disappeared over the years, blamed on drugs, runaways, misadventures. Then she saw her own name, carved near the bottom. Fresh, not yet crossed out. Lena stumbled back. I didn't agree to this. I didn't give anything. You entered, her mother said softly. You opened the door. Behind her, the other figures shifted. Their faces flickered, sometimes blank, sometimes displaying emotions that did not match their features. A man grinned with empty eye sockets. A child wept through a stitched smile. This place isn't a room, Margaret said. It's a mouth, and it's always hungry. The symbol on the floor pulsed faster. Something beneath it began to rise. The stone bulged, cracked, split open like a wound. A shape emerged, pale, wet, taller than anything human. The skin glistened with rot. Its limbs were too long. Its face, a collection of masks, stitched together, each with a human expression. Sorrow, rage, ecstasy, apathy. It opened its arms. Lena's body locked again. Margaret reached for her, touched her shoulder. The cold was unbearable, like being touched by the vacuum of space. You have to choose, she said, or it will choose for you. What choice? Lena gasped. To forget, Margaret whispered, or to stay. A scream rose in Lena's throat, and this time it escaped. But as she screamed, the sound twisted in the air, bent around corners that didn't exist, looped back to her ears with a different shape, a different weight. She heard her own scream played back in reverse, layered with other voices. Male, female, child, old. All screaming in unison. The thing beneath the floor stepped forward. His hand extended. The masks on its face smiled. The creature's hand hovered inches from Lena's chest. It didn't touch her, but she felt it all the same. A pressure, dense and internal, as though her heart had been turned inside out and stretched toward that pale, impossible limb. Each of its fingers twitched with unnatural rhythm, and every flick sent shards of memory sliding through her skull. Images of other lives, other victims, flickers of rooms that didn't exist, but somehow had, long corridors lined with beds that breathed, elevator shafts that sang lullabies in static. Lena screamed again. It wasn't a sound of fear this time, but resistance. Primal. She stumbled backward, her shoulder brushing against one of the chairs, her hand catching on a splintered armrest. The moment her skin tore, just the smallest cut, everything stopped. The thing froze mid-step. The stitched faces twitched. His arms lowered. The air collapsed in on itself with a dull, crushing silence. Then the voices, all at once. Hundreds, maybe thousands, screaming from the walls. The floor vibrated beneath her feet. The names carved in stone began to glow red-hot, smoke pouring from them. The room pulsed like a living heart. Lena looked down. Her name. It was glowing, but it hadn't been crossed out. Margaret was beside her again, still calm, still unreal. This place, her mother whispered, it lives on memory, on pain, on the stories people try to bury. Lena clutched her bleeding hand. What does it want from me? To remember. She staggered back as the creature began to move again. Slower this time, arms lowering. The carved symbol under its feet cracked apart, splintering like ice, revealing a pit beneath. From that black void came not heat, but cold so deep it froze the breath in her lungs. And a sound. Not voices now. Something worse. The sound of pages turning. Thousands of them. In unison. The creature sank back into the pit, taking the pulsing red light with it. The other figures, the nurses, the doctors, the child with the stitched smile, all turned to Lena and then crumbled to dust. Only Margaret remained. She stepped into the circle and reached for Lena's bleeding hand. I saved you once before, she said. I broke the rules to get out. But now you've seen it. You've touched it. You can't leave unless you take something with you. Lena's voice cracked. Take what? Her mother smiled sadly. The truth. And then the chamber folded in on itself. The walls rippled. The ceiling shook. A violent wind roared through, even though there were no openings. The entire room collapsed into a red blur. And she was back. In the ER. Collapsed on the floor beside the nurse's station. Dust hung in the air. Disturbed. Everything was still. The wheelchair was empty. No mannequin. No blood. The nurse's counter was untouched. Lena sat up, gasping. Her hand still bled, the cut raw and real. But everything else, had it happened? Her camera was gone. Her phone too. Only one thing remained in her coat pocket. Her mother's ID badge. She turned it over. The words had changed. "You brought it with you." A sharp buzzing erupted in her ears. She doubled over, pressing her palms to her head. When it faded, she heard something far worse. Knocking. Not on a door, but inside her mind. A rhythm. Familiar. 12 knocks. Then silence. She staggered to her feet, limped toward the staff exit. It was there again, open just as it had been when she first entered. The sunlight outside looked wrong. Warped. Too bright, too still. She stepped into it anyway. The sky above the parking lot was cloudless. Her car sat exactly where she left it. But she wasn't alone. Figures stood in the windows of St. Hedwig. Watching. Not angry. Just waiting. Lena climbed into her car and drove without looking back. She didn't go home. She drove 3 towns over. Booked a motel under a false name. Showered twice. Slept for 14 hours. But the next morning, the dreams began. They weren't like dreams she'd had before. These were vivid. Detailed. They played like old footage, black and white and grainy. They always took place in St. Hedwig. But not how it was now, how it had been. Functional. Lit. Staffed. Patients walking the halls in hospital gowns. Therapists writing notes. Orderlies chatting near the cafeteria. And then something would shift. The lights would dim. Doors would lock. And people would begin to vanish. One by one. The dream always ended in the red room. Always. Each time she saw something new. A new name carved into the wall. A new patient strapped to a bed. A new whisper. A new scream. She tried telling someone. A colleague, a therapist, even her husband, eventually. But none of them believed her. They smiled politely, nodded with that concerned tilt of the head. And over the next month, all of them disappeared. Not in a dramatic, sudden way. They simply faded. Stopped returning texts. Their phones went to voicemail. Their homes were empty. No police reports. No online mentions. Just gone. Replaced in the world like erased pencil lines overwritten by something else. She kept a list. Each time she dreamed, she added the names she saw on the wall. And each time, she crossed out another person she knew in real life. Soon she stopped sleeping. But it didn't matter. The dreams started coming during the day. In reflections. In car windows. In her coffee. She'd glance up and see the hallway outside her motel room replaced by a blood-red corridor. She didn't know how long she had. But one night, weeks later, she woke up in her bed with her hand bleeding again. Fresh. And on her nightstand sat a medical file. Her mother's handwriting on the front. Inside were 12 pages. Patient reports. All stamped with the same diagnosis. Non-compliant to extraction protocol. Under each photo was a handwritten note. Remember T.O. Forget the final page had no photo, just her name, and a space where a photo should go. She didn't remember falling asleep, but she remembered waking up. The motel room was darker than it should have been. The blackout curtains were drawn tight, but no sunlight bled through their edges. She turned on the lamp. Nothing. The bulb was warm, but no light came. A faint humming buzzed at the base of her skull. Familiar now, constant, like something tuning itself to her frequency. The file still lay open beside her. Her name. No photo. The paper was cold to the touch. Moist. She rose slowly, checked the door. Still locked. Chains secured. But the hallway outside was wrong again. Instead of faded motel carpet and flickering exit signs, she saw tile. Mottled beige tile with flecks of gray hospital floor. Her hand went to the doorknob. She hesitated, heart thudding. From the other side came the sound of footsteps. Soft, measured, 12 steps. Then silence. She stepped back, sat down, clutched the file. Something told her the red room hadn't let her go. It had simply followed. She looked around the room. Everything looked normal. Phone, television, cheap motel artwork of sailboats and seagulls. But then she saw her reflection in the mirror above the dresser. It wasn't mimicking her. It stood still while she sat. Its face was blank. Its eyes missing. She turned away sharply. When she looked back, the mirror was cracked, and the reflection was gone. She left the motel that afternoon. No checkout. Just grabbed what little she hadn't already burned and drove. The dreams didn't stop. They changed. Instead of seeing St. Hedwig as it was, she saw what it was becoming. She saw roots beneath the building, organic, twitching things that pulsed and bled. She saw the walls breathing. She saw herself walking the halls in a nurse's uniform, clipboard in hand, smile plastered across her face while a patient behind her screamed into a mouthless face. And always, the red room waited at the end. Sometimes, it called to her with voices she recognized. Childhood friends, lovers, her own voice echoing back. Other times, it sang. A low hum, dissonant, like an engine groaning beneath a sea of blood. She moved every few days trying to outpace it. She drove until the car broke down. Hitched rides. Slept in hostels, basements, empty cabins in the woods. But each time she opened her eyes, something from the hospital had followed. The mask. It began appearing in places. At first just in dreams. Then in reflections. Then she found it in her suitcase one morning, folded neatly atop her clothes. It wasn't a mask she recognized from St. Hedwig. This one was white, featureless, smooth, too smooth. When she touched it, the same pressure bloomed in her chest as it had in the red room, like a vacuum pulling on her soul. She dropped it. It didn't fall. It hung in the air for a moment, then vanished. That day she didn't speak a word, not out loud, because the whispering had started again, inside her voice. When she said things, they echoed wrong, layered. It was no longer just her speaking. She tried silence for days, but the voices didn't need sound anymore. They whispered from her thoughts, spliced her memories with scenes that never happened. She remembered surgeries she never performed, screams from locked rooms, a child begging her to stop, a man whispering from under the bed. She remembered being a patient, and a doctor, and a thing in the walls. The worst part? None of it felt wrong. Each memory fit like a jigsaw puzzle she didn't know was missing pieces. She realized, slowly, terribly, that she wasn't just haunted. She was inhabited. Whatever the red room was, it wasn't a place. It was a process. Conversion. Took you and it folded you into its story. And once you entered, you weren't the main character anymore. You were a page, a line, a memory in its house. She returned to St. Hedwig once more. Not by choice. She awoke in her car, parked just outside the rusted gate. No memory of how she got there. The building hadn't changed, but the sky above it had. It was red, pulsing, alive. She stepped out of the car. Her legs moved without her decision. The staff door was open again. The air tasted of metal and ash. She passed through the psych wing, the ER, the nurse's station. Everything where it had always been. Only now the lights worked. Soft fluorescent glow. Buzzing gently. Figures moved in the hall. Nurses. Patients. But their eyes were blurred out, their mouths covered with gauze. None of them looked at her. Not until she passed the game room. The Monopoly board was set again. The thimble in the middle of the board. All the pieces back in place. A single note sat beside it. "It's your turn." Lena didn't sit. She walked past the nurse's station, empty now, and into the stairwell where the red walls waited. This time, the symbol was carved on the first step. Then the next, all the way down. The door to the red room opened before she touched it. The circle was complete. The chairs were full, but there was one empty seat. In the center, a mirror. Instead of a symbol on the floor, there was only her reflection. She stepped inside, looked at the others. They looked back, and one by one they smiled. Margaret sat to the left. A child with a stitched smile sat to the right. The walls shimmered, alive with breath. The floor pulsed once, then again, and then the red room exhaled. When the hospital was bulldozed 3 months later, nothing was found in the lower levels. There was no stairwell, no chamber, no files, just stone and dirt. No records of Margaret Morell ever working there. No patient files from the psych ward. No mention of Lena Morell anywhere. Except, in one of the bricks salvaged from the lobby, a single name was carved beneath the dust and soot. Lena A. Morell. It was crossed out. The night shift at St. Hedwig Memorial Hospital had always been a dead zone. Even before the closure, it was a place people only passed through out of necessity. James Kerr, the new security guard, had volunteered for the post after hearing it paid well and came with an empty schedule. The hospital was shuttered, cordoned off, but rumors swirled about break-ins, vandalism, and worse. James wasn't superstitious. He just wanted the money and a quiet place to collect his thoughts. The hospital's main entrance was barricaded by heavy steel doors, painted appealing, hospital green. James's first few nights were spent pacing the dimly lit parking lot, his flashlight carving circles through the thick fog that settled low on the ground. The silence was overwhelming, broken only by distant crows or the metallic creak of the building's old bones settling. The first few days passed uneventfully. James made his rounds, logged in, and occasionally shooed away trespassers. He was beginning to think the stories were just stories. Then he heard the sounds. It started with a low humming, like a forgotten tune vibrating through the walls. It was faint, barely perceptible beneath the steady drip of leaking pipes and the soft buzz of flickering fluorescent lights. One night, near the old psychiatric wing, the humming grew louder, shifting into something like a chant. He followed it, flashlight trembling in his grip. The door to the wing was slightly ajar. James pushed it open. Inside, the air was stale and heavy. The walls were scrawled with faded, frantic messages. "Help me. Don't leave. They are here." The chanting pulsed from somewhere deeper. He ventured forward, every instinct screaming at him to turn back. But he didn't. In the middle of the room, a circle of rusted beds surrounded a single, cracked mirror. The chanting came from behind it. James stepped closer. His reflection wavered. Then, without warning, the mirror shattered. Glass exploded outward, spraying him with sharp fragments that bit into his skin. He stumbled back, clutching his arm. The chanting stopped. The silence returned. But now, something else was in the room with him. James's breath caught in his throat as the shards of glass settled like rain around his feet. He wiped blood from a gash on his forearm, but his eyes stayed fixed on the mirror's jagged remains. The surface had splintered into impossible angles, each reflecting parts of the room, and something else. Movement, not his own. In one fragment, a pale hand pressed from the other side of the broken glass. Fingernails cracked and blackened, the skin mottled as if rotting. The fingers twitched, desperate, searching. James backed away slowly, heart hammering, the flashlight's beam flickering with his unsteady grip. The chant, so loud moments ago, was now a faint whisper, like the hospital itself was trying to breathe in secret. A voice, soft, desperate, drifted from the darkness. "Help me." He spun toward the sound. Empty beds lined the peeling walls. Torn sheets fluttered in a cold draft that shouldn't have been there. The whisper came again. "Help me?" James gripped his flashlight like a lifeline and moved toward the furthest bed. Beneath the mattress, a ragged bundle stirred. He reached down. Fingers shot out and grasped his wrist. Cold. The hand wasn't flesh but something colder, more hollow. Like a corpse's touch. James yanked free, stumbling backward, knocking over a rusted force-stand that clattered loudly in the silence. The whispering stopped. The door slammed shut behind him. He lunged for the handle, yanking it, but it wouldn't budge. "Hello?" he called out, voice cracking. Only silence answered. A sudden chill crept up his spine as the room grew darker. The fluorescent bulbs overhead flickered and died, plunging him into near-total blackness. His flashlight sputtered weakly. The walls began to close in, Or was the darkness just playing tricks? The whispers returned, louder now, overlapping voices in a chaotic chorus. They circled him, spoke his name, begged, pleaded, screamed. And then, a scream pierced the air, sharp, high-pitched, inhuman. James dropped to his knees, covering his ears. The air around him thickened, pressing down like water. He could hear his heartbeat pounding in his ears, blood rushing in his temples. Suddenly, a hand gripped his ankle. He looked down. A woman's arm, pale, bruised, skeletal, snaked out from under the bed. Her face emerged slowly from the shadows. Eyes hollow, mouth sewn shut with thick black thread. She reached for him. James scrambled backward, hitting the far wall. The chanting became a growl. The shadows moved with purpose. He felt hands grab his shoulders, pulling him toward the bed. He screamed, struggling. The last thing he saw before blacking out was the cracked mirror glowing faint red, the shattered glass twisting like a mouth ready to swallow him whole. James awoke to cold, dampness seeping into his clothes. His head throbbed, mouth dry as sandpaper. He blinked against the darkness, struggling to focus. He was lying on a metal slab, a gurney in a room that smelled of antiseptic and rot. Faint fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting long shadows that twisted across the cracked tile floor. The walls were smeared with peeling paint and dark stains. Something had been written in smeared charcoal on the far wall. "Welcome back." He tried to sit up but found his arms strapped down with thick leather cuffs. Panic surged through him, burning his lungs. "Let me go," he gasped. A figure emerged from the shadows, tall, thin, wearing an old hospital gown yellowed with age. Its face was obscured by a veil of black hair, eyes glowing faintly beneath. "Why do you struggle?" it whispered, voice rasping like dry leaves. James twisted against his restraints. "Who are you? What do you want?" The figure stepped closer, the floor creaking beneath its feet. "This place," it said, voice barely audible, "is a prison for the forgotten." James's eyes darted around the room, searching for any means of escape. But the door was gone, replaced by a wall of writhing shadows. The figure reached out a skeletal hand, tracing the lines of James's face. "You saw the mirror. You heard the voices. Now you belong." James recoiled, heart racing. "Belong?" he whispered. The figure nodded slowly. "We all belong here, trapped between the living and the dead, between memory and oblivion." Suddenly, the walls seemed to breathe, pulsating with an otherworldly light that cast grotesque shapes dancing across the ceiling. From the shadows, more figures emerged, patients and staff from decades past. Their faces blurred, memories fading into something else. A nightmare made flesh. James's eyes widened in horror as one stepped forward. A nurse with hollow eyes and a twisted smile. "Stay," she whispered. "Stay forever." He struggled harder, but the restraints held fast. A voice echoed inside his mind, a chorus of whispers chanting his name. Then the gurney began to move, slowly at first, then picking up speed. It rolled him down a long, narrow corridor lined with broken windows and flickering lights. The figures followed, silent and relentless. At the corridor's end was a door heavy and ironbound. The gurney stopped. The door creaked open. Beyond it, the red room waited. The iron door groaned open, revealing a chamber bathed in a sickly red light. The smell of damp earth and decay filled James's nostrils as the gurney rolled inside, creaking on rusted wheels. The walls were lined with jagged stones, wet with condensation that glistened under the blood-red glow. The floor was carved with symbols that pulsed in time with his heartbeat, a rhythmic thrum that seemed to echo through the very bones of the room. In the center stood 12 chairs arranged in a perfect circle, each occupied by a motionless figure shrouded in tattered hospital linens. James's chest tightened as a figure rose slowly from one of the chairs, its body stiff, limbs moving with jerky, unnatural motions. The face beneath the linen was a mask of despair and rage, stitched together from pieces of several faces. Eyes flickered behind the cloth, alive and watching. A whisper floated through the chamber, indistinct but filled with urgency. Choose. The gurney halted in the center of the circle. The restraints snapped open, dropping James onto the cold stone floor. His knees hit the ground, and he shivered, both from the chill and the oppressive weight pressing down on him. The figures didn't move, but their eyes followed him. He felt their gaze burrowing into his skin, peeling back layers of sanity. The red light dimmed slightly, focusing on a single chair opposite the entrance. The seat was empty. James felt a pull, a force drawing him toward it, magnetic and relentless. His legs moved before his mind could protest. He sat. The chair was cold but solid, and as he settled in, the figures leaned forward, their stitched faces twisting into silent smiles. A voice spoke, clear and resonant, filling the room. "You are the keeper now." James swallowed hard. What does that mean?" The voice replied, calm yet chilling. "To remember, to hold their stories, to never let the past fade into silence." He looked around, eyes wide. "Am I trapped here?" "No," the voice said. "You are bound to this place, a guardian of memories, a prisoner and a witness." The figures began to dissolve, their forms unraveling into wisps of shadow and light. The red glow faded, replaced by a soft, cold blue. James felt a flood of images rushing into his mind. Faces of patients long gone, voices lost to time, moments frozen in fear and hope and despair. He understood. This hospital was a tomb, not just for bodies, but for memories, for souls caught in limbo. And now so was he. The door creaked shut behind him. Silence, except for the steady thrum of the pulsing cymbals beneath the floor. Time lost meaning as James sat in the chair, waves of memories crashing through his mind like storm tides. He saw moments of kindness, a nurse comforting a frightened child, doctors celebrating small victories, and horrors beyond imagining. Silent screams in locked rooms, whispered betrayals, endless loneliness. The voices of the lost whispered endlessly in his ears, a ceaseless tide of sorrow and longing. He understood his fate, to be the keeper of their stories, the one who remembered when all else was forgotten. But beneath the weight of memory, a seed of rebellion took root. James clenched his fists and closed his eyes. If he was trapped here, a prisoner of this place, then he would find a way to turn the prison into a prison break. He focused on the carved symbols beneath the floor. Each pulse was a heartbeat, a rhythm of the hospital itself. He reached out, imagining the pulse in his own chest syncing with the ancient rhythm. Slowly, the room responded. The blue light flickered, then brightened. The stone walls hummed. A whisper pierced the air. "Leave." James shook his head. No, the symbols flared, and the room shook violently. Dust and debris fell from the ceiling. The circle of chairs shattered. But James remained seated. The spirits around him cried out, some in fear, others in hope. In that moment, he became something new. Not just a keeper of memories, but a guardian of escape. He would carry their stories out. He would make sure they were never forgotten. As the chamber dissolved into shadows, James felt himself lifted, pulled back through the twisting corridors, through shattered mirrors, past the circle of rusted beds, and finally out into the cool night air. The hospital loomed silent behind him, its dark secrets locked once more. James staggered into the foggy parking lot, the first rays of dawn breaking through the mist. In his pocket, he felt something hard. He pulled out a small, worn notebook, the memories he had carried, pages filled with names, dates, and stories. He looked back once. The hospital was still, waiting, but James was free, for now. Dr. Mira Collins was eager to prove herself. Fresh out of residency, she accepted a position at St. Hedwig Memorial Hospital without hesitation. The hospital had been closed for years after a series of mysterious deaths and disappearances, but it had recently reopened with a new administration promising a fresh start. For Mira, it was the perfect opportunity, a chance to build her career, a challenge to be part of the hospital's revival. Her first night on shift was colder than she expected. The autumn wind rattled the hospital windows, and the fluorescent lights flickered intermittently, casting eerie shadows in the deserted corridors. The smell of antiseptic was sharp, but beneath it lingered something older, a faint trace of mold and something faintly metallic, like dried blood. As she made her rounds, checking on the few patients admitted to the psych ward, Mira felt eyes watching her. Not from any of the patients, most were sedated, but from the shadows themselves. In the nurse's station, she found a folder labeled Incident Reports. The handwriting was shaky, the pages yellowed with age. They detailed strange occurrences. Patients waking up with unexplained bruises, reports of whispering voices in empty rooms, sudden episodes of hysteria among staff. Her curiosity piqued. Mira pulled the folder aside to see more recent reports. The handwriting had changed, more urgent, more frantic. One report stood out. Patient #47 disappeared from secure wing at 2:17 a.m. No signs of forced entry or exit. Surveillance footage corrupted. Staff unable to locate. Hospital administration notified. The name was blurred, but the date was from last week. Suddenly, the lights flickered violently and went out, plunging the room into darkness. Myra's breath hitched. She fumbled for her flashlight, the beam cutting a shaky path through the black. A whisper grazed her ear. "Help!" She spun around, heart pounding. Nothing. Just the cold, empty station. She swallowed hard and forced herself to move forward. The hospital was waking, and something was waiting. The beam of Myra's flashlight trembled as she moved down the corridor, its narrow cone of light slicing through the suffocating darkness. The walls seemed to breathe, the peeling paint pulsating faintly, as if alive. Somewhere ahead, a door slammed shut with a dull thud, echoing down the empty hall like a gunshot. She forced herself to keep walking, the whispers growing louder, more insistent. Names, fragmented phrases, half-forgotten pleas floated through the air. "Don't leave me. Help me. Remember." But whenever she turned, there was only darkness. Reaching the entrance to the old surgical wing, Mira hesitated. The air here was thick, heavier, like the hospital's breath caught in its lungs. The door was cracked open, a sliver of faint light flickering within. She pushed it wide. The room was a cavern of shadows and dust. An old surgical table stood center, rusted clamps and forgotten instruments scattered across the floor. The walls were streaked with faded stains. Old blood? She couldn't tell. A cold draft brushed past her, carrying a faint, metallic scent. Her flashlight flickered, and then the overhead surgical lights, long dead, blinked to life, bathing the room in a harsh clinical glow. Myra's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't alone. At the far end of the room, a figure hunched over, its back to her. The hospital gown it wore was stained and torn, and long dark hair obscured its face. It didn't move as she entered, only a faint, ragged breath escaping from between its lips. "Hello!" Myra's voice was steadier than she felt. The figure turned slowly. Empty eye sockets stared back, the skin around them mottled and pale, as if the eyes had been gouged out. Mira stepped back, tripping over a broken instrument. The figure moved suddenly, faster than seemed possible. A rasping whisper filled the room. "Help me?" Mira lunged for the door, but it slammed shut on its own. Trapped, her flashlight died, plunging her into darkness. She fumbled for her phone. No signal. The whispers became a chorus. The figure stepped closer. Hands cold as ice grazed her arms. A scream caught in her throat as everything went black. When Myra's eyes fluttered open, she was lying on the cold, rusted surgical table. Her wrists and ankles were bound by stiff leather straps, biting into her skin. The stale scent of blood and rust filled her nostrils, mixing with the antiseptic's ghost. Around her, the surgical lights glowed with an eerie, pulsing rhythm. Shadows danced on the cracked walls, elongating and twisting into faces. Faces she recognized, twisted in silent screams. The eyeless figure stood at the foot of the table, unmoving, watching. Myra's breath hitched. She struggled against her restraints, but they held fast. A voice echoed through the room, low, mournful, almost a chant. Remember, remember. The figure reached into a pocket of its hospital gown and pulled out a small, blood-stained notebook. It extended the book toward her. Her mind screamed to refuse, but her hands twitched involuntarily, reaching for the book. The pages fluttered open, revealing scratched handwriting and hastily drawn symbols. Names of patients, dates, and cryptic notes covered the pages, each entry more frantic than the last. Myra's eyes scanned the words, and a chill ran down her spine. They detailed experiments, human trials conducted in secret, patients subjected to torturous treatments, forced isolation, and mind-altering drugs. Many had vanished without a trace. The last entry was dated just a week ago. A sudden, cold wind swept the room, extinguishing the surgical lights. Darkness swallowed the space, leaving only the faint glow of the notebook. The figure leaned closer, whispering, "Will you remember or forget?" Myra's heart pounded as the voices swelled, a cacophony of cries, laughter, and desperate pleas. Her mind fragmented, memories bleeding into one another, her own past blending with those of the hospital's victims. Tears streaming, she clutched the notebook tight. "I remember," she whispered. The restraints snapped open. The eyeless figure vanished into the shadows. The lights flickered back on. Myra was alone, but the notebook burned in her hands. The hospital was not done with her. Myra stumbled to her feet, the notebook's weight pressing heavy in her hands. Its pages whispered in a language she didn't understand, yet the words burned into her mind like scars. Each name, each story was a thread weaving her tighter into St. Hedwig's dark tapestry. The hallway outside the surgical wing was unnervingly silent. Her footsteps echoed, each one swallowed by shadows that seemed to stretch and twist, elongating impossibly as if alive. The hospital was a maze, its corridors shifting and folding, warping her sense of direction. Her phone was dead. No signal, no light. She forced herself onward. In the psych ward, the flickering lights revealed faces pressed against windows, pale and desperate, mouths opening to scream but no sound emerged. They reached out, fingers trembling like smoke, their eyes full of sorrow and warning. Myra's breath quickened. She tried to speak, to ask their names, but the air swallowed her words. Then she saw it. The red room door. She didn't remember walking there, but there it stood. A heavy steel door with the familiar symbol etched deep into its surface, glowing faintly red in the dim light. Her hand trembled as she reached for the handle. A voice, soft and cold, whispered behind her, "Don't open it." Myra spun around. An older woman stood there, eyes shadowed but fierce. "You don't know what you're carrying," the woman said, gesturing to the notebook. "That book, it's a curse." Myra tightened her grip. "I have to know. I have to remember." The woman sighed, defeated. "Then you must be prepared to face what remembers you." Suddenly, the walls pulsed. The hospital groaned, a living beast awakening. The red room door slowly creaked open. A cold wind blew from within, carrying faint screams and a chorus of whispers. Myra stepped forward, notebook clutched tight. Inside, the red room was a chamber of shadows and memories. 12 chairs circled the center, each occupied by a ghostly figure with stitched faces, their eyes empty holes that seemed to pierce her soul. At the center was a mirror, cracked and smeared with faded blood. Myra's reflection shimmered, then warped. She saw not herself, but the faces of every patient lost to St. Hedwig's past. Their eyes pleaded silently. The notebook vibrated in her hands. A whisper filled the room. "Will you join us? Remember forever." Myra swallowed hard. She stepped toward the mirror. Her fingers brushed the cracked glass. The mirror rippled like dark water, swallowing the light and pulling her in. Myra felt herself falling, through memories, through pain, through centuries of loss, until she landed in a place outside time. The red room was endless, a void filled with whispered stories and broken lives. Figures drifted around her, reaching, grasping, begging for release. Her own face stared back from 1,000 mirrors, each reflecting a version of herself lost to the hospital's madness. A voice echoed, familiar yet distorted. Remember, Myra's heart shattered. She realized the terrible truth. The hospital didn't just trap souls. It fed on memory. It lived by the stories people told and the ones they forgot. To enter was to become part of the endless story. To leave was impossible. The stitched faces gathered around her, their hands cold as ice. They pulled her into the circle. Her voice joined the chorus. The notebook fell from her hands, pages fluttering open to the first name. Mira Collins, her reflection faded into shadow. Outside, the hospital stood silent, waiting for the next story.